is something you probably will not see in arbitration cases. That's the most serious burglary, and that is burglary of a residence at night or burglary of a residence with a weapon or becoming armed with a weapon. So going into somebody's house and stealing a gun would make it a burglary first, okay? You can only commit a burglary first in somebody's residence though, okay? Burglary second is going into somebody's residence during the day, okay? Or going in to a business at night, okay? So the most serious you can get with a business is burglary second, okay? But burglary second for residence is during the day, okay? Now,
so it's a stiffer penalty in your domicile. It's something like that.
And what is night or day?
Yeah, that's
Wow.
night or
interesting.
day makes a difference. And then burglary third is going into a building. So sometimes outbuildings on property, like a detached garage in the backyard or a storage building back there, is considered a burglary third,
Oh.
okay? Sometimes there's enough of a connection to the property that they can make that a burglary second, but most of the time that's a burglary third. And going into a business during the day or into an office that might be closed for a holiday or something during the day would be considered a burglary third, okay? Most businesses would be entered at night, so that ends up being a burglary second, but sometimes they go in, you know, at times that things are closed. We see kids go into schools sometimes, and yeah, and so that becomes a burglary third, possibly a burglary second, depending on what time they did it. And we see them go into homes. Often they go into homes during the day while people are at work, and for whatever reason they're either skipping school or got suspended for school, or it's during the summer and they don't have school to go to. Most of the time it's because they're not at home being monitored by somebody, because probably their mom or dad is at work and they're at home and they go out and break into houses. A lot of them do damage getting into the house, some of them do not. Some people don't keep their doors locked. And some people don't keep their windows locked. And sometimes it ends up being that they know the people who they're going into their houses. We have a lot of kids that go into houses of friends and steal video games because they've been there and seen them and they want them. And then they're not friends anymore because they've gone in and stolen their stuff. But a lot of times that's how they end up solving it, because they know the only people that knew that I had this were these people who'd been there to see it. And then they start questioning those folks and they find out that, yes, indeed, I did know that they didn't lock that window. And so I went in. But burglaries, we do not get a lot of burglaries that end up going into the arbitration program, but we do get some. And we do usually find that that most of the time we've got some damage and we've got some you know, items missing. And usually we get a list from victims of the things that are missing. And in arbitration, we can have juveniles pay restitution. The limit in our program is $500. Some programs have a limit of $250, and I think some are more than $500. But we believe that given a kid 90 days to pay restitution, most of the time a deductible for insurance is around $500. That seems to be a fair amount for a kid to be able to pay. If we have a case where the restitution is just astronomical, we sometimes do not put it in the arbitration program because it is so much. But a lot of times, especially if you have co-defendants and you've got a $500 deductible, then that means each would pay $250, and that is something that usually is attainable. It's going to fall on the parent most of the time to try to pay that, but at least we feel like that's an amount that they might be able to pay. Obviously, if somebody breaks into your house or somebody breaks something of yours and they've got restitution to pay, you have the ability to sue that person civilly and seek a recovery. You can sue their parents in magistrate court for up to the magistrate court limit, but that's it.
What is magistrate court limit?
I believe it's $7,500 now.
Okay.
But that's the maximum that parents can be held accountable in civil court for kids, okay? So most of the time, we are, really thinking $500 is usually a hardship for these kids to come up with. But it is an amount that normally gets our victims close to being whole again. Because we believe that if you have insurance and you have to use that insurance, we want you to be getting your out-of-pocket back. We can't guarantee that the insurance company's going to get a recovery. And sometimes insurance companies do want a recovery, and victims may ask you about that. We do not provide information to insurance companies, so if the insurance company calls here, I won't tell them anything because juvenile records are confidential.
Yeah.
So we just don't talk to them about that. But I will tell you that the victim would have the right, obviously, to tell their insurance company who the person that did the damage is. And so they could go after them if they want to civilly, but we don't take a part in that. And if a person is suing somebody civilly for the damage, then typically we would not begin restitution, because if they have a civil suit going, then they need to take it that way too. And that's usually the way our judges see it as well. If you've already got a civil suit, then we're not going to order restitution at this point. And judges have the discretion, if I take a case to court, they have the discretion of determining what amount to order for restitution, and they have to look at a lot of factors such as the kid's ability to pay versus the person's ability to absorb the loss. And so sometimes when we go to court and we have a lot of restitution, a judge still doesn't order the kid to pay more than sometimes $500 because they feel like that's what they can pay. And especially younger kids, because, they can't even get a job. Sometimes we have a 12-year-old. $500 restitution is not something he's going to be able to do, But if it is $500, then at least a parent sometimes can work out a way that they can pay it, and the kid can do some work for them to work that off. But we do often have that restitution factor.
Did you say there's a difference between
Yes.
burglary damage, like physically breaking into a house, damaging property? Was that
There's no difference on the burglary chart, because you can just walk into an unlocked house and commit burglary.
so it's no worse. It's no worse whether you
Forcibly get in.
forcibly get in or not. It's the same regardless.
Right. The difference is that you could have that malicious injury to property added to it.
Oh, okay,
So
okay.
you can
okay.
have that charge added to it.
Okay.
But it wouldn't up your degree.
Okay. Oh, okay.
It wouldn't
okay.
change the degree of burglary.
All right.
Disturbing schools. We don't get as many disturbing schools as we used to. It used to be one of the most popular charges because it's a real open statute. It basically says, willfully or unnecessarily interfere with or disturb in any way or in any place the students or teachers of an elementary or secondary school. That really
broad.
says a lot, doesn't it? Technically, you're disturbing other kids if you start sharpening a pencil during the middle of their test.
Yeah.
Technically, you're disturbing other kids if you start coughing really loud during the middle of a movie that they're watching on TV. Would we take those charges? No, because that's really a school discipline issue. So what we try to do is make the distinction between whether this is school discipline or it's a true disturbance. You were asking earlier about some of the threats that happen. Sometimes those threats don't fall into one of those categories where we can charge like an unlawful use of phone or unlawful communication or anything like that. Sometimes what they've done is they verbally told somebody that they heard a rumor that something bad was going to happen on such and such day. And it's real vague, but it's enough that every kid at that school gets really concerned. And then you have parents who start calling the school and saying, my kid's not coming to school. And then you have resource officers who start looking into it, and they've got to have all these other people come to the school because they've got to have some help in case it's real, okay?
Right.
And so those type things, sometimes we've charged disturbing schools because we couldn't find any other charge
Gotcha.
to make. Those cases don't end up usually coming to arbitration because my feeling on that is if a kid is making those kinds of statements and causing all of those things to happen, before we decide what to do with that kid as far as a punishment goes, we probably need to have a psychologist talk to them, and we probably need evaluation. So I usually take those to court and get an evaluation ordered, because we can't do the evaluation through arbitration. But what I want to find out with that evaluation is, are they really a danger? Were they just joking? Do they understand how bad this was, what they did? And I want them to see that process through, because I don't want them to ever do it again. Our resource officers and our law enforcement, they do a really good job of, whenever something like that happens and they identify the person, they take it a step further. They make sure there are no weapons in the home. They make sure that the kid doesn't have access to anything like whatever they said they were going to do at the school. They make sure that all that's done, and if they can't assure that, then they'll put them in detention, okay? But if they don't detain them and they send it to us and the charge ends up being something like disturbing schools, then we're gonna have to look at, is this something that we really should be putting into arbitration, or should we be having somebody who's way smarter than me talking to this kid and figuring out what's wrong with this kid, you know? And so a lot of times we do end up taking those to court. But you will see some disturbing schools where really no other charge fit what they were doing, but what they were doing was more than just breaking rules, okay? We do have judges in the state who have said, I will not hear a disturbing schools case on a student from the school, because I don't think the purpose is for students to be charged. I think disturbing schools' purpose is for somebody coming onto the campus that shouldn't be there causing disturbance. And so we also have to always look at that. So we try to find other charges other than disturbing schools, because that charge is not a real favored charge in the state, even though there have been rulings on it and they say that it's not overbroad and they say that it's perfectly good statute. But, you know, as I'm telling you, I do think that some things could fit into disturbing schools that really shouldn't be crimes. And so disorderly conduct is something that you'll see a lot more of. Disorderly conduct is where kids are at school. A lot of times it's not at school. They can be located on the highway, a public place, gathering, grossly intoxicated, disorderly, boisterous. They can be cursing, yelling, screaming, using profane or obscene language, and that all qualifies for disorderly conduct. There's also a disorderly conduct ordinance, and we have that here in Rock Hill especially. And that says that disorderly conduct also includes engaging in a fight. And so a lot of our kids engage in fights, and a lot of them do that at school. Some do it in the neighborhood, but a lot of them do it at school. Sometimes we do find them intoxicated at school. We find them intoxicated at football games and things like that, and those are disorderly conduct charges. If we find two kids fighting, and we can't say that one kid was the primary aggressor, that they were the one who started the fight, that they were the one who really intended to fight, and that the other person really only acted in self-defense or didn't even act at all, then we usually don't go with assault and battery on those cases, because, you know, unless we can prove that, then we basically have two people that were mutual combatants, and we'll charge them with the disorderly conduct, and they'll both be charged. And you will see some of those charges come to you. Sometimes we are able to do a contract with some kids on disorderly conduct for fighting at school, and we tell them they have to stay away from each other, they have to write us an essay and do things like that. But a lot of times those cases are going to end up coming to you either because there were other things involved, or it was just a little too much for us to say, write us an essay. We think you really need to see somebody and talk to somebody and have a hearing, because we think that the formality of that hearing process is going to get your attention more than anything else we do. And so you will see some of those. You'll also see some weapon on school property charges. And the weapon on school property is carrying onto the property of the school any object which may be used to inflict bodily injury or death. That could be a knife, it could be a razor blade, it could be, we've had tasers before, BB guns before. If the weapon that they were carrying is a gun, it will not come to you, that will go into court. But sometimes it will be a knife or something along those lines. Sometimes it'll be as simple as, I have an after-school job, had it, I had a box cutter because I opened boxes at my after-school job and I forgot I had it. But somehow somebody at the school knew that you had it, so I don't know if you told somebody or what, but it ended up that an administrator found out about it, and that you didn't threaten anybody with it, and that's the reason that we'll allow that to go into arbitrations, because there was no threat made with it. You didn't show it physically to anybody, but somehow somebody knew you had it and they reported you. We've asked the schools, I've asked them a lot over the years, what would happen if somebody came to you and said, I have an after-school job and I have this box cutter to open boxes and I've accidentally brought it to school. Would you charge them? And they tell me no. No, we wouldn't charge them. We would keep it. We wouldn't let them have it, but we wouldn't charge them with it. So sometimes kids will say, well, I didn't know what to do when I realized I had it with me. Tell somebody, go to the office and tell them, because it's much better if you go to the office and tell them than if we find it, because then it's a crime and we're going to charge you with it. Most of the time, kids will say they have a knife for self-protection and they don't pull it out. They might be involved in a fight, but they don't pull it out. Or it's in their book bag and one of their friends or fellow classmates saw it in the book bag, and they will then say, hey, wait, I saw it. You know, we got to do something. And so those end up being charged with weapon on school property.
How about fireworks?
Fireworks,
Where they fall in that?
well,
Where they fall in that?
I think you could argue that that could cause bodily injury. And I think it would just depend on why they had them and the circumstances surrounding it as to whether they decided that they had brought it for any purpose that they thought, that you know, the officer feels that it is actually being used as a weapon or could be there to be used as a weapon. You will see possession or consumption of beer or alcohol under the age of 21. It's illegal, and you will see it. And if they were adjudicated in court, there would be a mandatory suspension of driver's license at some point with these crimes. So it's very important that these kids understand that they're getting a real break to be able to go through this program on that type of crime. Also, on possession of marijuana, it's illegal for them to have any amount of marijuana in their possession. These are the type crimes that can sometimes affect their ability to get federal student loans, federal grants. It can sometimes affect their ability to qualify for the Life Scholar program, things like that. So going to court on those charges and ended up being adjudicated delinquent on those is a bad thing. So they're really getting a break to be able to go through this program, because they never have to say that they were adjudicated delinquent of these charges, because going through this program means you're not adjudicated delinquent, and it ends up helping you be able to save that ability to get those loans, to get those grants, and to get that scholarship. So those are all of our statutes.
I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So do we how is the prescription drugs, how is that?
Prescription drugs,
And
kids are, sometimes, we are seeing some of that,
Yeah.
where kids are getting other people's drugs and
Mhm.
taking them to school.
Yeah.
And we treat that very much like marijuana, because possession of those prescription drugs is illegal. And so oftentimes they're trying to find out at the school where they got them, who they got them from, and they're trying to, get with it. Most of the time it's a family member that they've taken it from, and they're trying to get with them and trying to get all that worked out. But at the same time, they do end up a lot of times making charges on those.
Okay.
And those do come into the arbitration programs.
Okay.
They do. We're seeing more of that in the last, 2 years, would you say? Yeah, 2 years.
It's-
Yeah, because it's becoming a lot more prevalent. But
It's a big deal in
but
Florida.
another thing we do
Yeah.
see is we see kids who take drugs to school that they have taken from a grandparent or a parent or
Yeah,
somebody.
they take to.
Sometimes they don't even know what they took.
Right.
And they take it to school, and then they have it in like a Ziploc bag, and they just hand it out to people.
Yeah.
And then you have other random kids who are taking and ingesting these drugs and don't even know what they're taking.
Right.
And there have been some that have had to go to the hospital, that have had, and a lot of those cases ended up not going into arbitration, because the technical term for that is distribution.
It
Whether you got
is.
money for it or not, you distributed it. And so it's one of those things where a lot of those end up going to court for that reason, because it's so dangerous. It really is. And we are seeing a lot more of that.
Oh,
We
yeah.
really are, and I hate that we're seeing that,
Oh,
but
it's-
I'll
I can
tell
see
you,
more
we're
of it.
seeing almost no crack and almost